Neighbor Horror Story 1: The Thing on the Ceiling. About a year ago, I moved into an old apartment building far from the city center. The building's exterior was cracked, the paint was peeling in places, but the rent was affordable. I wanted a quiet life, so I didn't question it much. During my first week there, I started noticing strange noises from the ceiling every night around 3 o'clock. At first, they were faint tapping sounds as if someone were lightly drumming their fingers on the ceiling. But as the days passed, the sounds began to change. Soon I started hearing dragging noises at night, muffled whispers, and sometimes sharp, sudden sounds like someone being silenced mid-scream. One night, exactly at 3:13 a.m., I was lying awake when a faint creaking sound spread through the room. It felt as if something was crawling slowly and heavily across the ceiling. I pulled the blanket up to my nose, my entire body tensing up. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to speak with my upstairs neighbor. I went up and knocked on the heavy old wooden door. Silence. A few moments later, the door creaked open. A thick, stale air hit my face from inside. In front of me stood a pale woman, her bones visibly pronounced under her skin. Her unkempt hair clung to her scalp, and her clothes seemed almost fused to her body. Her wide eyes weren't looking at me, but rather at something behind me. Something in the empty space. I hear the noises, I stammered. The woman tilted her head slightly and in a hoarse voice, almost as if she were about to cry, whispered, "We are not alone here." I didn't know what to say. I took a step back. The woman suddenly shut the door and locked it 3 times from the inside. That night, the noises worsened. They no longer came only from the ceiling, but also from within the walls of my bedroom. Sometimes, while lying in bed, I heard footsteps just beyond the wall. One night, while trembling under my blanket, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps above me. They stopped, directly over my bed. At that moment, I slowly looked up at the ceiling. In the corner of the room, at the junction where the ceiling met the wall, a dark figure crouched. It wasn't standing like a person, it was perched on all 4s, like an animal. It turned its head toward me. It had no eyes, yet I felt its gaze. It had no mouth, yet I could hear it whispering. The words were unintelligible, but my instincts screamed at me to run. I bolted upright, screaming, and turned on the lights. The shadow was gone. But on the ceiling, as if traced in mold, were 4 handprints stretching across the surface, as if something had been crawling there. The next morning, I left the apartment without packing a single thing. I never went back. A few weeks later, I ran into one of my former neighbors by chance. During our conversation, they mentioned that the woman from the upstairs apartment had been found dead in her unit, 3 weeks before I knocked on her door. According to the police report, the estimated time of death was long before the day I spoke to her, which meant the woman who opened that door was either something I imagined or something else that lived there. Neighbor Horror Story 2: The Man in the Garden. That summer, I rented an old house in a small town to escape the noise of the city. The house was a bit isolated, sitting in the middle of a vast garden. I wanted silence and solitude, but I realized too late that I was not alone. I noticed the first oddity on my 3rd night there. I was sitting by the window, enjoying the warm summer air. The moon cast a pale light over the garden. For a moment, I saw movement at the far end of the bushes. I squinted my eyes and saw him, a tall, thin man. He wore an old, nearly tattered coat. He stood motionless, just staring at me. A chill ran through my body. I immediately shut the curtain and began checking the locks. Sleeping that night was impossible. Every creak, every gust of wind made me flinch. By morning, I convinced myself maybe I imagined it. But the next night, he returned. This time, he was closer. As I lay in bed, I heard a faint tapping on the window glass. Slowly, I turned my head, and under the moonlight, I saw him clearly. The man was walking toward the window from the garden. His steps were irregular, as if one of his legs was broken and dragging behind him. His fingernails were long and blackened. When he reached the window, he stopped and tilted his head. He pressed his face against the glass as if searching for something inside. I held my breath. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the screen flickered and shut off immediately. No signal. The man in the garden suddenly smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. His mouth stretched wider than normal, revealing teeth that looked like tiny, sharp points. My heart pounded violently. For a moment, I thought he would smash the window and come inside. But he didn't. He simply turned around and slowly disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, I rushed to the town's police station and told them everything. The officers looked serious. One of them, an older policeman, asked urgently, "Did you find anything in the garden?" "No," I said. "I just saw a man, tall, dressed in old clothes, unsettling." The officers exchanged a brief glance. Then the older one nodded and said, "That man is this place's curse. 20 years ago, he was the owner of that house. One night, he snapped and slaughtered his entire family. Then he hanged himself in the farthest corner of the garden among the bushes." A deep silence filled the room. "When we found his body," the officer continued, "he had a horrifying grin on his face. And his teeth, they were sharper than normal. I never went back to the house. I left the keys with the police and left town that very day. But sometimes, I still see him in my dreams. That shadowy, long-limbed man limping toward me through the dark garden. And that inhuman grin." Neighbor Horror Story 3. The Whisper from the Next Apartment. After graduating from university, I found a cheap apartment in an old building outside the city. The cold walls of the worn-out building seemed to carry the sorrowful remnants of the past. On my first night, I was startled by whispers coming from the adjacent wall. A woman's voice. Strange, fragmented words. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe an elderly neighbor talking in their sleep, I reasoned. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew more unsettling. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of scratching. The sound was coming from the wall. Then a voice echoed, "Find me, save me." The next day, I ran into an old man in the apartment building and asked who lived in the next unit. His face fell. "That place is empty, son," he said. "The woman who lived there died last year, but for months before her death, no one heard her cries for help." A cold shiver ran down my spine. That night, I gathered my courage and went to the door of the neighboring apartment. It was slightly open. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dampness and the scent of rotting wood. The moonlight cast a faint glow on an old, faded photograph hanging on the wall. A woman stared out from the picture, her eyes empty, yet they seemed locked onto mine. Just as I was about to turn back, I noticed an old notebook on the floor. I wiped off the dust and opened it. Inside, a letter was wedged between the pages. With trembling hands, I began to read. "They forgot me here. My son, my only child, locked me inside this apartment and left. For days, I screamed, I cried. No one heard me. In the end, my body died. But my soul is still waiting. If you found this letter, please set me free." At that moment, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. It was as if all the blood drained from my body. Frozen, I turned around, calm order, and saw the old woman. Her hair was thin and white as strands of silk. Her eyes were empty and sorrowful. but for a brief moment, it seemed as though she was pleading. I stumbled backward in fear, ran to the door, and fled the building. I never went back. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, in a new city, in my new home, one night, a voice came from my bedroom mirror. "Thank you. You found me." For a brief second, I saw her reflection, but this time her face was at peace before vanishing. Since then, I have never felt alone again. Sometimes, taught in the quiet, I still hear a soft whisper. You are not alone anymore.